Recording in progress. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm just letting a few more people join us. We're slowly having people join, so we'll just give them a minute or two. You're very welcome. My name's Naomi Murphy from Connect the Dots, and we'll get started in just another minute. A lot of people might join. Okay. Okay, we'll kick off and let people come in over the next few minutes. But just to welcome everybody, thank you for joining this webinar today on the proposed Cabinteely Greenway. As I mentioned, I'm Naomi from Connect the Dots, and we're looking after the consultation activities for this project. Just to give you the event agenda for the moment, we're having a presentation from Mark Campbell from Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and then I'll hand over to Robert Kelly from DBFL Engineers to show us the draft plan so far. My colleagues Rachel and Sabrina are hosting this with me today, so you'll be able to use the chat function to send your questions throughout to the host and panelists option when you use the chat. So ideally, if you can avoid sending direct messages to individuals, that'd be great, so we can see all the messages in our hosts section. So the feedback form is just a quick survey that we'll have as part of this webinar event after you've heard all the presentations, and then we'll do we'll close things out with a moderated Q&A. So that's the plan for now. You'll hear from me now in just a few minutes, but I will hand you over now to Mark Campbell.
Thanks very much, Naomi. My name is Mark Campbell from the Active Travel team in Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and I'm just going to give you a quick background, I suppose, of the project and where it's come from and where we're trying to get to. So many of you might be aware that this project, or a very similar project, was put forward back in 2015, but was unsuccessful, and there's several reasons for that. But I suppose over that almost a decade now, things have changed, and how we perceive things and how we are looking at things in terms of climate change. Our approach has changed on how we do lots of things in our lifestyle now, and one of those things is how we propose on getting around from A to B. We learned an awful lot of things from the feedback we received back in 2015. We reviewed everything, and we feel that we have taken on those concerns and that feedback, and that has fed into this particular proposal that's been put forward. It's really important, though, that we need to remember that there are real great benefits there in terms of these type of projects, and the obvious environmental benefits and the health benefits, and also the additional connectivity that we gain from that type of thing as well, from this type of project. Just next slide there, Naomi. So in terms of planning and policy context, the route corridor has been identified in the Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network Plan 2022, and that has really fed into the DNR cycle network mapping and the county development plan for 2022-2028. And really what that means is, at a very higher level, a strategic level, that these routes have been identified to create a much greater Dublin area cycle network. And that's important to remember as well. So it's not just, this is just one section of what is a greater Dublin area cycle network we're trying to pull together. But there's also the obligations in terms of our national and regional strategies and policies that we need to adhere to and a number of them have been identified there: the National Planning Framework, Smarter Travel, a Sustainable Transport Future, and the NTA Statement of Strategy 2018-2022, the National Sustainable Mobility Policy, and the Ireland Climate Action Plan, and obviously the National Cycle Policy Framework. So all these various strategies and policies are pulled together in order to direct us and inform us of how we're meant to go and bring things on the ground in a more local and regional context. Just the next slide there. So in terms of this particular slide, it is really just identifying, I suppose, the connections or the links between the health and well-being and the environment and transportation within Ireland. So in terms of a study concluded that people who have commute by bike have a 32% lower risk of dying from heart disease and a 40% lower risk of dying from cancer. And it's a fairly conclusive study that was undertaken there by the Institute of Health and Wellbeing and the Institute of Cardiovascular and Medical Science in the University of Glasgow. So there is quite a bit of weight behind that. Also, it's air pollution and how it's associated with poor physical and mental health, and how it causes 376,000 premature deaths annually in the EU, and has been identified by the World Health Organization. But simply just walking 30 minutes a day improves the sleep quality, your mood, and it decreases depression, stress, and anxiety. So there are huge benefits to the likes of these type of projects and encouraging people to get out and walking and cycling. But that moves us on, I suppose, to the environment. And unfortunately, I suppose transport makes up 19% of greenhouse gases that are emitted into the atmosphere in Ireland. And of that, 53% of those road transport emissions are generated through passenger cars, so the private car, basically. And despite, I suppose, there was a bit of a decline during the lockdown period that we had, it rebounded back in 2021, growing by a further 8%, which was a little bit disappointing. But I think people gained that idea of the cycling and the walking and exploring their own, I suppose, local environment, which was a huge benefit for transportation. But some of you might be aware, you may have seen the positive press release that came out this morning. It was from the EPA, and the 6.8% reduction in emissions in Ireland in 2023, which is fantastic, and it's great that we're going that way. But I suppose this thing in the tail is the fact that there was still a minor increase when it came to transportation, a third of a percent increase in transportation, while we had other sectors such as the residential sector was reduced by 7%, the energy industry was 21.6%, and agriculture by 4.6%. So we still have a way to go, and these are the type of projects that's going to, I suppose, lend ourselves to get to where we're trying to get to. So we are trying to achieve an overall 51% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, and that's under the Irish National Sustainable Mobility Policy. And to do that, we really have to work on how we figure about getting away or getting around from A to B, and how do we do that sustainably. The next slide, please. So in terms of the scheme rationale, there's three basic strands to it, which is one is sustainability, which was touched on in terms of how do we get around, how do we do that sustainably and reduce our emissions. The second was connectivity, how do we improve the cycle and pedestrian network that we have. We have a very good road network around the country and around the county, but how do we bring up to par the cycle and pedestrian network up to that as well? And finally is just inclusivity. So it's not just about focusing our attention in terms of transportation on those people who have licenses to drive cars, but for everybody. So everybody from the very, very young that are walking to school or cycling to school, right to the very old, and everybody in between, and despite of whatever ability they may have, disability. Next slide there. So in terms of the scheme objectives, so it's firstly is to enhance connectivity between Cornelscourt and Cherrywood, and that's for pedestrians and cyclists, and to encourage more walking and cycling trips. Two is to improve safety for people walking, wheeling and cycling, by maximising segregation of pedestrians, cyclists from vehicular traffic. And that's quite that's quite an important one to bear in mind. It is about the segregation, it's about the safety and security. If we manage to get that and people feel safe and secure, there's more likelihood that we can encourage people to get out and to do those short trips by wheeling and by cycling, by walking, rather than jumping in the car because they feel it's a safer way to do it, to reduce reliance on the car trips, and that's by providing sustainable alternatives, such as active travel means of getting around. And just the next slide, please. And 4 is to contribute to the achievement of climate action targets. And really that brings us back to, I suppose, the press release that we received this morning, which was from the EPA, and how we can start to increase, reduce our emissions in the transportation sector. 5, to improve accessibility to public transport by walking and cycling, just ensuring that everything is connected, that we have that we can walk and we can cycle to our bus stops, our Lewis lines, and our train stations, leave our bicycle or just jump on the train and get to our destination. And to deliver a proposal that is holistic in its approach, focusing on nature-based solutions, sustainability where possible. And I suppose, what does that mean for this particular project? I suppose we're really looking at things like surface runoff and how do we deal with, I suppose, downpours and deluges that they're not just going straight back into the stormwater system, which is already under pressure, but how we deal with it and I suppose recharge in terms of the surrounding green environment. And that's really what we're looking at. It's also about the planting of trees and the management of pollinator sites. So there's an awful lot of things that goes into play here, and SUDS, which is the sustainable drainage systems. So there's a huge amount of things that we can focus on in terms of positives for the locality. And then finally, to produce a design that is sympathetic to all environmental issues. And just the next slide there. So this particular slide is just to highlight that greenways aren't just about the rural environment. I think that there's a huge amount of press in terms of some fantastic greenways that are going around the country, and quite often they're associated with disused railway lines and all that type of stuff, and they're fantastic. They're great, and they're great for tourism and for the local community and all that type of stuff. But equally, we can have our greenways in urban environments, and they just take a slightly different form in terms of a sequence of green spaces and how the greenway connects those green spaces. So it's about pulling those routes through those safer environments, so the parkland environments, the green spaces that we have in residential areas that we have, and they're very much a safer approach, and they're very much connected to the community as well. But there are huge benefits, I suppose, that occur as a result of these type of projects. You can see here in Blackrock Park, which is a great park to go down and just visit to see how these type of projects work and work successfully as well. You can see how in Booterstown entrance there, before the entrance went into place, it was a really ill-defined approach into the park, and it was a green space that just, I suppose, bled out into a very windswept junction, and it didn't really have any definition to it at all. As you can see now, it's really inviting approach to the park itself. So now we have a really strong entrance on the Blackrock Village end, and we now have a very strong entrance on the Booterstown end. But you can see the improvement and how it brings and improves the parkland itself. But there's also the environmental aspects to it. You can see on the right-hand image there, we have the pollinator sites, which is defined by the cycle route. And that's really, really important as well, how it brings that biodiversity element into it as well. So there are those direct improvements, such as over 100 trees which were planted directly as a result of this particular project. And this is similar sort of things that we're talking about when we're thinking of Cabinteely Greenway. So just the last slide here, please. Next slide. Yeah, the purpose of this slide is really just to identify there are a few concerns that we see being raised time and time again, and people getting concerned about, well, how does emergency vehicles get to their destinations because more road space is being taken over by cycleways or pedestrian ways. And the fact is, these are improvements for emergency vehicles. And what ends up happening is, in times of congestion and those peak volume times when we have lots of cars on the road, we now have cycleways which are freed up for emergency vehicles to use. You can see the image on the left-hand side, which was in London. you can see that there's an ambulance being able to use the cycleway there, a shared cycleway, and also our own coastal mobility route in Dún Laoghaire, where we've got an ambulance which is able to use it. So not only do they bypass those congested periods of traffic, but they also, in terms of the Cabinteely Greenway, they will be able to end up getting to where are quite inaccessible areas at the moment. But when the Greenway goes through it, it opens those spaces up again for the emergency vehicles to be able to access to. And one other small, I suppose, concern that keeps cropping up time and again is the fact that the passing, I suppose, the cycleways and the pedestrian ways over to and taken away from the road space is somehow, I suppose, a negative towards elderly people and people that have mobility difficulties that really need to use the car. And in fact, it's far from that. So what we're trying to do is encourage as many people off the roads as possible. So taking away as many cars for people that don't necessarily need them, that can make those shorter journeys, those shorter trips to the shop, taking those cars away, which means for those people who truly do need the car, that need to get to where they have to get to, and because they can't walk to it or they can't cycle to it, they now have freer roads to use. So there are really good benefits to the likes of these type of projects. So look, I'll just pass you straight back to Naomi, and she'll go through the consultation period.
Thank you, Mark. I will just. Great. Okay, so this is just a brief bit about us. We are a stakeholder engagement agency, so we work with various different local authorities, government bodies, government departments on anything stakeholder engagement and public consultation. So these are just some of the values that we bring to the project, and I'm just going to try to be very quick about the consultation process so far so that you get a sense of what we've done, what has come out of the consultation activities, and then I can hand you over to the main event, I suppose, the DBFL slides, which are giving the overview of the plan so far. So we had a public session in June last month, and then out of that, it was decided that this webinar needed to be held to tackle the fact that we had many more people that needed to engage with the project in this way. So it's positive. Many people wanted to engage. We had 5 workshops last year and the start of this year. So there was a residence workshop in November, community and businesses workshop in December, and then primary, secondary school and disability advocacy group workshops in January and February of this year. A total of about 104 attendees, probably more based on the public session where we had over 100 people. At the workshops, the main focus was on a couple of themes, which you'll see throughout these couple of slides. So number one being safety, secondly, design and use, and thirdly, lastly, the Greenway route options and kind of layout. So the purpose, I suppose, is just to present the project so far. We want to get discussion in terms of the chat, and thank you for everyone that has given us comments and questions so far and any clarifications that might be needed. So there's a couple of options that are being presented on certain elements of the scheme, and then to gain further feedback on these topics. And as I mentioned, the main way we want to do that today is through the chat and through survey that's going to pop up on your screen at the end of the presentations. We want to ensure everyone has an opportunity to submit their feedback. And just to jump into the registration survey, so previously last month we had a registration survey that gave us some helpful insights around people that were living in the area, the different associations they were part of, and these are just a selection of some of the groups. The key themes that came out of that were similar to what came out of our previous 5 workshops, so things around environmental impact, number one, the safety and security of the plan, the route and its connectivity, the purpose and justification for the project, the impact that it'll have on residents, the timeline and implementation, support and opposition, generally back and forth to different viewpoints on the scheme so far, and then our infrastructure and facilities along it. So the key findings from our previous consultation, and I'm sure some of these things will come up through our chat function and through our survey today, is the need for well-designed lighting that ensures visibility without causing harm to wildlife, There were traffic concerns, so including speeding limits and potential conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians and that kind of that right of way and use of the roads, and addressing antisocial behaviour and ensuring safety in particularly narrow locations or isolated locations. In terms of design and use, then there was a preference for natural, biodiverse, and inclusive design features, maintaining existing trees and incorporating wildflower and planting. More seating was seen as a positive. Accessibility features like armrests and hard surfaces, that it should be natural, fun, and have colourful elements. In terms of the route and layout, so the discussion focused a lot on path design, markings, and surfaces. So there were concerns in terms of visual contrast for individuals with visual impairments and the inclusion of shared paths. And some of that will come up now in the next slide. Potential impact on existing environments, so noise pollution, disruption of natural habitats, and being very sensitive and conscientious to that. And then disruptions through construction. There was positivity around improved local connectivity and excitement about the environmental benefits of the project. I think this is one of our last sections, so around accessibility and inclusivity. So in the disability advocacy workshop, they provided really comprehensive input into various things that will need to be considered going forward. So the main points, I suppose, around the importance of contrasting path colours, consistency, I suppose, around design so that it's very clear, the delineation between the paths, considerations for visual impairments, standardization in layouts, so again, just making sure it's consistent, accessibility of seating, player areas, signage and shelter, and the need for inclusive design and post-event or post-design consultation as well with disability groups to make sure that it's all addressing the concerns. So lastly, I suppose the next steps for the consultation are that a full report will be published on the DLR website, including feedback from the public session last month, today's webinars, feedback, and then tomorrow's recorded viewing session for anyone that can't access Zoom or can't get online for whatever reason. That'll be in Dean's Grange Library at 10 a.m. So regular updates will be posted to the project page on the DLR website. I can make sure you have that. I have a link in the bottom here. And I can circulate these slides to anyone that's registered to this webinar. And anyone that has registered in general will be notified via email on the further consultation stages. The public will be invited again, so anyone on this call, anyone that's engaged so far will be invited again to make further submissions on the final plans during the statutory process, which is Part A process, which is to be confirmed. And I think I have our timeline here. So this, I suppose, gives a bit of a sense of where we were in terms of the design workshops last year into the start of this year with community members, the preliminary design in kind of phase 2, which includes this phase that we're currently in, and then the statutory phase, which will happen in Q4 of 2024. This will be reiterated anyway by Robert at the end of his slides. As you know, the timelines was an important bit of feedback or factor that came in the consultation so far. So at this stage, there'll be meetings, public meeting and webinar to present designs and further steps, and submissions can be made. And then with the view to, by the end of the quarter, having the planning process concluded. So I think that is it for me. Oh, just a heads up, I suppose, that this is what the quiz will look like, or the survey that will look like at the end of our slides. And I will now hand you over to Robert. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Naomi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Good evening. Robert Kelly's my name. I'm director with DBFL Consulting Engineers. And so I'm just going to add a bit more detail to what Mark and Naomi have covered, specifically in relation to the proposed or emerging proposed scheme. So Naomi, if you want to move on a slide or two there. Yeah. So what we'll cover is the proposed route or the study area that's under consideration. And then we look at the emerging draft designs and go into a bit more detail there to give you some background on that, and then just to reiterate some of the next steps to wrap up before we hand back to Naomi. So if you want to move on a slide there, Naomi, another one again, please. So the proposed route or the study area in essence really is about just over 2 kilometres in length. So the scheme is to connect Cornels Court Village around the junction of Old Bray Road and Cornels Court Hill Road, and then to extend eastwards towards Brennanstown and connect with the recently completed Druids Glen scheme and then onwards into the Cherrywood Greenway network. So for ease of reference and plus ease of assessment, we've broken the study area into kind of 4 character areas or sections. And so I'll go into each of those sections now. I'll talk a bit about the kind of current conditions and constraints, and then the emerging preferred designs. So Naomi, if you want to move on, please, and on to the next one. So the first section, as I said before, the extent of the scheme is at the junction between Albury Road and Cornels Court Hill Road. So the first section, in essence, really addresses Cornels Court Hill Road. And what we have here, we have a number of constraints to consider. Obviously, the Albury Road itself is quite restricted in terms of its width. We obviously have to accommodate existing traffic movements, bus movements. There are a couple of bus stops, and there are also existing trees and boundary walls there which have to be respected. So on the next slide, if you want to move on, Naomi, you can see there on the right is an image presenting what the current draft proposals would be, which are in essence is to provide a shared facility for pedestrians and cyclists on the east side of Cornels Court Hill Road. There will be an upgrade to the junction between Cornels Court Hill Road and Albury Road to provide for enhanced pedestrian and cycle crossing facilities. And then bus stops along this stretch will also be upgraded, and there'll also be a further controlled crossing point on Cornels Court Hill Road to aid with anybody looking to access the Greenway, particularly from the likes of Gorton Drive and Kerrymount. So the scheme then continues through into section B, which is on the next slide. Naomi, I think we through Glenlawn Drive and the area surrounding, and obviously the constraints noted here within Glenlawn Drive. Obviously, we have existing kind of through traffic. We obviously have the stream and the trees adjacent to the stream, the green area surrounding the stream, which is obviously of a high value from a public amenity and biodiversity perspective. So we want to respect that. We've noted kind of safety issues, particularly at the roundabout at the Glen Drive junction at the eastern end of this particular stretch, and then obviously facilitating access for residents within the area. There's also quite challenging gradients down towards the stream, which we have to negotiate also. So on the next slide, Naomi, I think in this particular section, we haven't finalized our plans with regard to what option would be the preferred option. So there's a number of options which I'll present here. There's 3 options for consideration at this stage, but I'll go into kind of a bit more detail as to the different characteristics of those options now. So option 1 essentially involves the provision of a shared use greenway, which is on the northern side of that green area to the north of the stream, but immediately adjacent to the Glenlawn Drive road. That'll be a 4-meter wide shared path as is proposed on the Cornels Court Hill Road section also. So we're trying to keep away as much as we can from the existing trees and the stream itself, and to do that, in doing that, we would preserve all existing trees, and we propose to enhance the public realm and planting around there also, as there'll be proposed additional greening between the Greenway facility itself and the adjacent street. So a key feature of this particular option is that there'll be additional traffic calming proposed on Glenlawn Drive to reduce speeds and to make Glenlawn Drive safer. There's a proposal to provide landscape build-outs, and I'll go into a bit more detail. I'll give you a bit more visibility of that in the next slide. So in essence, there's at either end of Glenlawn Drive as well, there's 2 proposals to upgrade the roundabout initially on the eastern side to provide enhanced pedestrian and cycle crossing facilities and just improve general safety at that roundabout. And then on the eastern end, it's proposed to implement a modal filter through Glenlawn Drive, which would facilitate pedestrian and cycle access only through to Glenlawn Drive. And again, I'll go into that in a bit more detail in the next slide or so. And And the images on the bottom of the slide there to the left kind of indicate what the modal filter might look like using a kind of basic visualization there. And obviously on the right then, there's a general image of what the Greenway might look like in the context of the existing and improved landscaped area on the green at Glenlawn Drive. So the next slide, Naomi, please, goes into a bit more detail on the type of arrangement that's proposed under option 1, which are basically landscape build-outs, as you can see there, which would act as has a dual purpose really. It acts as a traffic calming feature, whereby traffic would have to give way in one direction for the other, so it would calm traffic on Glenlawn Drive, and then the additional build-outs could facilitate landscaping and some of the SUDS features which Mark alluded to in his slides. The next slide, Naomi, then I think touches a bit more on the proposed modal filter, which is a measure to reduce through traffic on Glenlawn Drive, and to kind of protect Glenlawn Drive for local access only, to provide for a much calmer street environment, which is a feature which has been implemented in a number of locations across Dublin and in Laoghaire-Rathdown recently. That such a feature has been implemented in Eden Park, which is near Goatstown, Dromartin area, whereby there was a significant issue in relation to through traffic, and that was removed following the implementation of the modal filter, which allows for true movement of pedestrian and cyclists only. So I think that has been well received by residents in that particular area. So the next slide, Naomi. So just to explain how the modal filter would work, the existing traffic movements are shown here in the slide here, which, as you can see, the green arrows there indicate full movement and full access through the streets surrounding Glenlawn Drive and Park Drive. And then the next slide, Naomi, just indicates how the through route from Park Drive to Glenlawn Drive would be removed for vehicular traffic, but facilitated for pedestrian and cyclists. But it still indicates that there is access to all residential properties via Glen Drive and Park Drive. So just to move on again, Naomi, to option 2, which is quite similar to option 1, but it doesn't propose to implement any of the landscape build-outs on Glenlawn Drive. So Glenlawn Drive would be, as you can see from the image down the bottom right, is a cross-sectional image. So that would propose to keep with 2 traffic lanes consistently in each direction. The Greenway facility would again be a 4-metre wide shared facility with a landscaped buffer between it and the street. And as with option 1, the proposal to upgrade the roundabout and the modal filter would apply. Option 3, Naomi, sorry, next slide, would be essentially to, on the basis of, I suppose, reduced traffic volumes on Glenlawn Drive as a result of the modal filter, it may be appropriate that the pedestrians and cyclists it may be possible for them to use Glenlawn Drive and share that street with vehicular traffic with the lower volumes and lower speeds that may be present. And so there would be no proposal under this option to actually construct the Greenway within the green area. So the green area would remain as is, essentially. So the next slide, Naomi, please. So we move into section C, the third section, which is essentially through Cabinteely Park. And it's important to note, I suppose, a lot of people obviously will have will be fully attuned and knowledgeable on the various constraints within Cabinteely Park. So they're both kind of natural and man-made, really, as there's obviously constraints with regard to biodiversity. We've got kind of rich meadowed areas, and we've obviously got to respect the built heritage of Cabinteely House itself. We've got challenging gradients through the park as well to ensure that we construct a scheme which is universally accessible. And then we've got interactions with other existing users of the park, such as the football pitches, which are quite busy, particularly at weekends. And we also have obviously extensive areas of woodland as well. And then we have to consider the opening hours of the park itself, and whether a Greenway facility through the park would be accessible, for example, in hours of darkness in the winter. Sorry, Naomi, next slide, please. And so the emerging preferred route at this stage proposes to essentially to come to the park and to follow the existing trails to the north of the football pitches, to upgrade those routes, and on the basis of kind of anticipated increased levels of activity in the park and kind of general activity of people accessing the pitches and the other amenities within the park. The Greenway, crucially here, would provide for a separate 3 meter wide cycle track and a 2 meter wide footpath, as opposed to the 4 meter wide shared facility elsewhere. And that would be a similar type of arrangement that can be found in Blackrock Park, which is the image on the bottom right there. There's a bit of work to do in terms of, you know, deciding on the detail of how the facility might operate, you know, whether the cycle track would be one side of the footpath or the other. And I suppose there's engagement that needs to be carried out there with the clubs that use the football pitches to understand what would be the best type of arrangement there. We are looking at creating closing the existing entrance just north of the roundabout, and looking at a new entrance on the corner of Old Bay Road there, as indicated by the arrow, and possibly looking to provide for a safe crossing facility onto Clonkeen Road, and then which would then lead onto the N11 as well also. So the benefit of this option is that it avoids the kind of areas of high value from a biodiversity perspective. It respects the stream as well. It stays sufficiently distant from the stream, and as you can see by the red line there, it's realigned to avoid the kind of impacting on trees on the western extent of the scheme. So the next slide, Naomi, I think, is the constraints associated with the final section, which is section D, which is fundamentally the section of the scheme which crosses Brennanstown Road and then leads on towards Druids Glen, and then into the scheme extent, which is essentially to tie in with the Cherrywood Greenway network. So some of the constraints here, obviously we're crossing a road in Brennanstown Road, so consideration has to be given to kind of providing for a safe crossing point. Then when we move westward beyond Brennanstown Road, there's obviously an area of dense woodland, which is not really accessible at present. There are kind of informal trails. There's some kind of elements of fly tipping, etc. But generally, it's a fairly natural environment which we need to respect. And we obviously still continue to border the stream. And then as we cross Brennanstown Avenue, there's proximity to apartments and residential units which we need to respect, and also there's opportunities there with regard to integrating with future development of residential properties. So the next slide, Naomi, I think goes into some more detail on the actual proposals as they stand at the minute. On section D, you can see as we come through the park, as we had that previous arrangement of the segregated cycle and footpath, when we move westward of Brennanstown Road, we revert to the shared facility, the 4 meter wide shared facility, on the basis that the kind of levels of activity would not be as high as one would expect through the park. There's a potential opportunity for connection to the future residential scheme to the south of the stream, but generally we're keeping the Greenway to the north of the stream until we approach the residential development there off Brennanstown Avenue, at which point we cross over to the south of the stream, but respecting separation distances from those residential apartment developments, and we connect in with the recently completed Druids Glen bridge scheme there. So the image is there, and bottom right, the center image kind of shows the kind of 4 meter wide proposed shared facility through that section just south of Carriglen, and then on the left we have a cross section which kind of shows, again, just kind of quite crudely, how a 4 meter wide shared section or 4 meter wide shared greenway would look in the context of the stream. So I think the next slide, Naomi, goes into a bit more detail in terms of the Brennanstown Road crossing and what's proposed there, which is essentially a zebra crossing for Greenway users. And to provide for that crossing in a safe manner, it's proposed to provide traffic calming in the form of build-outs along Brennanstown Road, so traffic would yield to users of the Greenway crossing at that point. So the next slide, Naomi, is our tie-in point, essentially our western extent. And again, it just shows a bit more detail as regards the connection to the Cherrywood Greenway network and Druids Glen scheme. And you can kind of see the apartment developments there, which we're seeking to maximise separation from and improve greening and public realm in front of those units as well. So we'd also have an additional raised zebra crossing across Brennanstown Avenue, which is the access road to those residential properties. Next slide, Naomi, please. So then just to wrap up on my slides, really the next steps is probably going over a lot of what Naomi has already covered, but I think on the next slide, Naomi, it just kind of reiterates where we're at in the process, which is engagement with regard to the draft emerging proposals. We're in the next quarter hopefully going to take on board the comments we received from events like this, and then look to finalize the preliminary design in Q3 2024 before preparing for a Part 8 planning submission in the final quarter of this year. And that would obviously, as well, there would be an opportunity for the public to review the proposals at that stage, to make comments and submissions and to influence the final layout of the scheme. And then obviously there was a decision made on the scheme, which we're hopeful will be made before the end of this year. And to say that then really if that was successful, construction wouldn't commence till 2026, just subject to NTA funding. So next year would be really detailed design from the design team's perspective. But that just gives you an overview of the timeline as we stand at this stage. So I'll hand back to Naomi because I think that's my last slide.
Yep. Thank you, Robert. That's great. I will now just launch the survey, and and thank you again for putting all of your comments and your questions into the chat. I do want to remind everybody that everything that comes into the chat and all of that we get from the survey will go into our report, anonymized, just so that everybody knows everything's being collected. So we're just going to relaunch the poll, and hopefully everybody can see that. So there's just 7 questions. It's to help us, I suppose, coordinate and gather all of the various responses and comments people might have. There's, you don't have to answer everything. There's some open text there, and there's also just things to vote on. So we want to give people a bit of time to complete that. If you have any issue accessing that quiz or survey, please let us know in the chat. We'll give you just a few minutes to fill that out, and then we have had quite a bit of questions through the chat, so it gives us a minute to just organise ourselves, and we'll just give it, as I say, maybe 5 minutes to let everybody participate in that survey. So thank you, and you'll hear from me now in just 5 minutes. Okay, thank you to those that have done this survey. We'll give just one more minute to allow a few more people to complete the quick quiz, and then we will launch into the answering as many of your questions as possible that have come through the chat. Okay. Thank you for everyone that's been submitting. I'm going to leave the quiz open just for another little while, and I might just start to pull up our questions, and I'll direct them to Mark or Robert then, who can jump in and answer them. So I will start with a question that came in a few times just around the nature of the consultation. So if this is a statutory consultation. So Mark, I might just direct that firstly to yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So no, this isn't the statutory consultation at the moment. That falls into place when we begin the Part 8 statutory process. At the moment, this is the pre-Part 8 consultation. So the purpose of what we're trying to do at the moment is to get as much feedback from the community and from the stakeholders as possible that will actually impact in terms of the design and how we deliver things on in terms of the design itself. So everything we hear back from people and from the community is going to feed into the design. So no, there's another opportunity, and we will get to the Part 8 statutory process later on down the line.
Great. Thanks for that, Mark. Okay. The next one might be answered in combination, but it was just specifically on the concern of climate change and what studies have been done to show how this might impact or not the local environment or impact on climate change.
Yeah, sorry, in terms of climate change, yeah, well, we obviously for this particular project, we haven't done a study which is going to show, but we're aware of the climate change impacts, the benefits we gain from having our cycleways, our greenways, and our pedestrianways, and from trying to remove people from the cars, or where possible, transfer people into out of the cars and into short trips on bicycles and footways, because of the emissions, the clear emissions that's emitted from the private car.
Just to add to that, Naomi, there would be as part of any project like this, there's an appraisal process that has to go through, and as part of that appraisal process, we would prepare an analysis and quantification of the kind of modal change, that modal shift that Mark refers to. So we have to quantify climate change benefits, safety benefits. So it all kind of presents a reasonable case from a business case perspective, So that's something that follows on once we have a final scheme design, and we're submitting for Part 8.
Okay, great, thank you. There was comments here around speed limits, just around speed limits in the park estate, so it being reduced or not, or I don't know if you want to comment on maybe on speed limits or traffic in general in relation to the scheme.
Well, I don't know if you want to take this, Robert, but in terms of there's recent legislation has been put through, so residential streets will be reduced to a 30-kilometer speed limit throughout. So that is going to be impacted at the park area as well. So that will have to fall in line with legislation that's been put forward.
Great, thanks for that. I don't know, Robert, do you want to comment?
No, that's fine. I think Mark has addressed it. As I said, the speed limits will be a separate process to the Part 8 process. So I think.
Great, okay. I just want to lump in a couple of different questions that have come up around connectivity, and I know this came up before as well around this particular scheme and it connecting to other areas or other schemes. Do you want to maybe just comment on how it connects into a larger network ultimately, and maybe, you know, just a bit on that, if you can.
Yeah, well, I think just to come in on that, Naomi, I think there's a few comments, particularly in relation to, you know, questioning why we can't just use the facilities on the N11. You know, what we're trying to create here is a network, and the network consists of different types of linkages. So you might find that the N11 is more attractive to kind of commuters, more confident cyclists, but we're trying to cater for all abilities, and not just cyclists, but people who can walk. And so the facility we're trying to create here is really one that we'd see has been for more vulnerable users, less confident pedestrians and cyclists. And so it forms part of an overall coherent network. As we mentioned before, it will link in with the Cherrywood Greenway network as well. So it provides a really attractive alternative route to the busy N11 corridor for people to commute, but obviously then it has a high recreational function as well, and that's a key part of a successful cycle network, really, you know. So I don't know if Mark wants to add to it.
No, I think you pretty much covered that, and it is about trying to cater for those that are less confident about using the N11 and those sort of motorway sort of cycleways that are going along. It is for more the younger people that we're trying to get on there, the kids and people who are less confident. So I think you've covered it there, Robert.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, there's been some positive comments, I suppose, that have come in just in relation to younger people being able to reap the benefits of this infrastructure, whether it's to get to school or the park, and then also, you know, coming from the perspective. I know there have been concerns that have come in around the Glenlawn Drive road, so that's something hopefully that can be addressed through the insights that we've gathered so far in this consultation process. And there is a question here around connecting to St. Bridget's Girls' School. So is there a plan for that, or widening of existing pedestrian paths from Cabinteely Park? If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so really, obviously, the Greenway goes through Cabinteely Park, so that brings safe and secure access into the park itself. And we're already talking with parks in terms of how we can use certain paths that are currently there, so we can get cyclists from the school down to the Greenway itself. So whatever way that's going to be done, it'll be a shared approach that's undertaken, very similar to what happened in Blackrock Park.
Okay, great, thank you. Just to move in then to some of the practical things, I suppose, that are much further down the line, you know, if this project can go ahead and all of that, around who will maintain the cycle lanes, part of the Greenway once it's completed, you know, how prompt will repairs or cleanups be, things like that.
Yeah, in terms of our maintenance of all our cycleways and footpaths, that's undertaken on a regular occurrence, and it's generally undertaken by our roads maintenance department, but that will be undertaken by DLR themselves.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So there's questions here around roads being closed and how it'll affect kind of businesses or residents if roads are being closed. If you want to just clarify for people what's intended.
Yeah, so in terms of the only thing that's been shown there is most filter, and Robert, at any point you can jump in here if you want to clarify anything. But really, what we're doing is every premises that's accessible by car at the moment will remain accessible by car. And what we're proposing is that you don't necessarily need two access points to gain into Glenlawn Drive, that you can access from the roundabout and access all the houses there, and likewise if you're coming from the other direction. So every house that needs a car to get to it will still have that, so that nothing will be shut off for anybody in a car.
No, I think Mark has addressed that point. Naomi, I wouldn't have anything else to add to that. Obviously, we'd offer to the slides will be shared afterwards, I'd imagine, and if people want to interrogate the map that we presented there quite quickly, admittedly. So, you know, hopefully that kind of illustrates the point. But if there's any confusion, yeah, I just say have a look at the slides, and then it should be apparent what we're trying to achieve.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And just to remind people, if you do want to finish off doing the poll, the quiz that was popped up, it is in the, if you hit on the 3 icons at the bottom, the more options you'll be able to see, you'll be able to submit your feedback as well that way. Just a reminder on that. So a couple of times this has come up on just the park kind of opening and closure times. I just wonder if you could clarify what's being affected there in terms of park closing times.
Yeah, so the park won't be open 24 hours. But what is being proposed is that during the winter hours, that the park will be the opening hours will be extended, and the purpose of that is to accommodate for people that are coming back from work or university or going to school, and making sure it's open for those guys as well when they're going in the morning. So all that's really going to happen is that we're proposing on having extended opening hours during the winter months, so it's pretty much in line with what the opening hours are in the summer months, but it won't be open 24 hours. We won't have 24-hour opening times for the park. And I think another few comments that are coming through there is in terms of lighting within the park, in terms of security, and also the ecology and how does it work hand in hand. So similar to the opening hours of the park, we'll make sure that lighting ties in with the opening hours. So it'll only be used in those winter months when it starts getting darker, but they will shut off once the park gates have been closed over. So therefore, we're not impacting in terms of the ecology and the fauna in the park itself.
Okay, thanks for that. Just a question on the cost of the project, and I think the query was here, what was the kind of cost, but I suppose the point is that the design hasn't been finalized, so a further cost estimate is done when the design is complete. Is that correct, Mark? And Robert, sorry.
Yeah, that would be the case. Yeah, so when we're finalized in terms of our route and our materials, etc., you know, that's when we would finalize the cost estimate. And so there'll probably be an indicative cost provided at Part 8 stage, but then if you move into detailed design, you know, things can change a bit, but it's continually updated. But I'd say at Part 8 stage, we'd have a good sense of an order of magnitude cost at that stage.
Okay, great. So let me see now, I'm just trying to quickly look through. Just a question here on tackling antisocial behaviour. I know this is a pretty important topic that comes up a fair bit, and it's not a often very straightforward challenge to tackle. But if you want to maybe just comment on how the design at the moment is looking to tackle that, just in terms of safety, I suppose, in general.
Well, I suppose in terms of, we've already liaised with the Garda Crime Prevention Officer, and he's feeding in terms of, he's reviewed the drawings, he has all that set of drawings that we have at the moment, and the purpose of that is that we'll liaise with him, trying to identify if there's any issues or is there any potential risks as we go through in terms of the route, in particular when it goes into the park itself. But there are standard, I suppose, design prevention methods that we tend to incorporate in all our schemes, and that might be down to the fact of how the vegetation is managed going forward close to these routes, in terms of lighting, in terms of the opening hours of the park, as we just mentioned. So there's lots of different techniques that are taken into place to ensure that the antisocial behaviour has been reduced or minimised. The one thing that's really worth bearing in mind is the fact that increased footfall, we're aware that the more footfall you get through an area, it improves and it acts against antisocial behaviour. So what tends to happen is antisocial behaviour tends to happen where there's not many people going through. So the likes of Blackrock Park, for instance, has really improved in terms of the antisocial behaviour, and in other words, it has reduced hugely as a result of the footfall, which has dramatically increased since the cycleways come through.
I don't know, Robert, do you want to comment on that, just in terms of the design?
Yeah, no, as Mark said, it has been a key consideration, and I think one of the benefits of the preferred route through the park now at this stage, which is sticking to kind of established trails and trails which are well used already. I think that's one of the major benefits over possibly alternative options we originally considered, which were closer to the stream, closer to the middle of the park, which wouldn't have probably had the level of activity that would provide for that surveillance. So yeah, just to say it is a consideration throughout.
Great. Just a question came in on the events, so the remaining kind of in-person events. We do have a recording of this being shown tomorrow morning in Dean's Grange Library, as I mentioned, with the same questions being posed to people. So that's the last of the events for this pre-statutory stage, and then we'll go into the statutory consultation in a couple of months. So unless does anyone else want to add to that, I think that kind of covers that question. The question here, just a question here on a traffic survey, if you want to comment on that, or if there's been one done, or just comment on the process for that in these types of projects.
Yeah, well, typically we would carry out a suite of traffic surveys, which we have done in this instance. So you know, that's just standard practice. I don't know, was there a particular area of concern regard to the actual traffic survey data? You know, we would cover the study area and the surrounding roads. But if there was a particular area of concern, we could certainly look at that. But generally, as I said, we will have surveyed the surrounding roads as part of this process.
Yeah, sorry, Robert. I suppose maybe the question is if they can access that. Is that normally something that's published or not online?
Well, I think it ultimately will be published as part of the planning documentation, I think, you know, so it'll be accessible at that point at least, you know.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. I just wanted to have a bit of a clarification here, because it's come in a little bit just maybe early on in the presentation. Maybe just to explain, and maybe this is for Robert, just on what is a modal filter. I suppose if you're not an engineer, how would you break that down for people, just to explain that, and maybe the rationale for it and the benefits of it? Or
Yeah, I suppose that yeah, it's a bit technical in terms of the term. Modal really refers to kind of travel modes, which are, you know, walking, cycling, or using the car, etc. That's each are a travel mode. So it's a filter for certain modes in that it prohibits movement by certain modes, in this instance vehicular traffic, and it allows other modes to access. So in this instance, we're proposing to facilitate pedestrian cycle access, but removing the route for connection for vehicular traffic. But as we mentioned earlier, there are alternative routes available. We're not eliminating access to any one property, but it just removes the convenience for, say, through traffic, for example, that's not local to the area, and that traffic will move elsewhere, or people will change mode, and that's the real benefit of the modal filter. Accepting that, you know, people do see them as an inconvenience, but generally, as I said, I cited the example of Eden Park within Laoghaire-Rathdown, which has been a major success, and you know, the kind of environment, kind of street which they've regained in that particular area, I think has been a resounding success. So, you know, there are numerous examples throughout Dublin, throughout Ireland at this stage, but hopefully that kind of sheds a bit more light on it. It's probably overly technical term, but that's how I'd best describe it.
yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's helpful. So I suppose I might just start with, there's been a couple comments just around wildlife impact and things, and I know it's definitely been mentioned a couple times today, but would you mind just either, you know, Robert or Mark, just kind of coming in to clarify what kind of studies or surveys are done to make sure there's minimal wildlife impact, or what can people expect to see, say, from in the statutory consultation stage?
Yeah, so at the moment, up to this point, we have had close contact with the biodiversity officer in Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. There's also the ecologist who's involved at the moment. they're currently undertaking various surveys of, I suppose, ecological surveys that are taking place in the park primarily, although it does encounter the whole route. And then, of course, we'll have the arborist involved as well. So the arborist will undertake his arboricultural survey of all the trees, identify what trees are, or what sort of condition they're in as well. So there's a number of, I suppose, prongs to this in terms of how it's tackled. And then in terms of the Part 8 process, we have to go through a number of different, I suppose, reports that have to be provided in terms of a screening. We have EIRs that have to be, that's the environmental impact assessments that have to be prepared. But we'll also be getting a preliminary ecological assessment report as well, or impact assessment. And what that will do is it will cover all the different aspects in terms of the ecology, the biodiversity, and the tree stands that's there as well. So we have that quite well covered. And given that we're going through the park, that the Parks Department wouldn't accept anything less than doing everything, I suppose, above board and making sure everything is correct and all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed.
Great. Okay. Thanks a million. Okay, so maybe moving away from the wildlife and looking at the junctions. So there's just a question there on side road junctions having painted zebra crossings applied to reinforce pedestrian priority over other road users. So I just wonder if you want to clarify on that. Just, I suppose, what types, maybe at this stage we're not sure what types of crossings will be applied.
Yeah, I think in general, I think that we probably sort of pointed or alluded to that when I was describing the options, but generally we would be proposing to provide kind of raised crossings for pedestrians across the minor arm junctions. We most likely won't get into providing zebra crossings at every minor junction because it wouldn't be required, but in providing a raised crossing, that gives the pedestrian a level of comfort and safety in navigating those crossings across roads which, you know, the volumes of traffic wouldn't be generally deemed to be overly high, but it still gives them that level of protection. So that's the general treatment we had envisaged.
Thanks for that. Okay. Maybe just keeping in that vein, I don't know if you wanted to comment on any parking that might be impacted along the route.
Yeah, so I suppose that one of the considerations is of the three options we probably presented for Glenlawn Drive in particular, you know, is that in the options with the build outs, for example, there possibly will be less kind of curbside parking availability there, whereas the other options propose to maintain the existing kind of two-way flow along Glenlawn Drive. So there's probably the opportunity to park there. But aside from that, I don't think that we're planning on removing any parking. You know, don't planning on removing any parking throughout. You know, really, the benefit of being a greenway is that it's separate from vehicular traffic, and you know, we apart from at junctions, we shouldn't really interact with vehicular traffic. So we're not really proposing to modify parking as part of the scheme.
Thanks for that. Mark, will I move on to the next question, or did you want to jump in there?
No, Robert has it covered. That's exactly it. So I think the plan is not trying to impact on any of the parking where possible.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. Just a specific thing that's come in here around who's funding the project and are there objectives that have to be achieved in order for the funding to be provided. Just thought that was an interesting one. It's been mentioned, I think, maybe in one of your slides, but just if you want to clarify that process maybe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So the MTA are funding the scheme. So and of course they have gateways that we have to get through. And there's a process that we have to get through, and each one of those gateways has to be achieved, and that there's deliverables on each one of those gateways. So we have to make sure that we are providing them on time, and that the NTA are happy and satisfied with what has been provided with. But ultimately, I suppose the funding comes from the NTA.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Just a couple of comments that have come in and questions just in relation to the submissions that have been made in this call. I suppose just want to reiterate that it will go into our final report that will go to DBFL and Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council. So as I mentioned, we will be combining the feedback that's come from today's webinar, last month's public meeting, and tomorrow's recording in the library. So it will all be combined and submitted before the statutory consultation takes place. The next point then, we talked about, I might just also remind people that if you click on the More button at the bottom with the dots, you can complete the quiz. Just a question that came in. I know this is something that's much further down the line, but just on the topic of construction, which is likely to not really take place until 2026. Do you want to just briefly kind of explain or mention how that process would go about it, or how long that might take? There's just questions here around what's involved, how long it will take, the type of impact it will have. I know this is something that's not necessarily easy to answer from this point of view, but from previous experience, if you want to just add what you can to that.
Yeah, look, I suppose it wouldn't be the most complicated type of scheme to construct, but there would be sort of considerations in regard to, obviously, maintaining operations within the park and working adjacent to kind of the stream, etc., which might have restrictions in terms of, there might be seasonal restrictions in terms of when we're able to work. So yeah, in essence, in basic construction terms, it's quite a simple scheme to build, but it's the constraints around that which may influence the program ultimately, So yeah, it's hard to say at this stage until, again, depends on what time of year we're putting the first shovel into the ground at, and what sort of weather we have, So it's hard to say really. I don't know, Mark, if you could add to that, but
Well, look, in terms of constraints, given that we're going through the park, and effectively we're trying to protect all the trees that we have in the park, and as well as the fauna and the flora as well. So these sort of restrictions definitely slow up a typical construction process. And then obviously as we go across Brandstown Road, there's another stretch there which is quite biodiversity rich. So definitely they'll be slower in terms of construction than there would be on a normal scheme where you're running along the road and things like that. So yeah, that adds on time. And of course we'll have to have the ecologists involved, and there'll be inspections and all that type of stuff. So that just complicates things a little bit more.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing your best to answer that one. I know it's difficult and it's so far ahead. So I'm just conscious we're on time. We wanted to close this at 8 p.m. So we do have a bit more time to answer a couple of more questions. I will go through what I can, and then what we haven't managed to touch on, we will update the FAQ doc and we'll republish that onto the webpage along with the slides from today, so you can make sure any details you can look into then. Just a reminder, there's just been questions in about the library recording. So that's a recording of this session that will be presented in a room in the library tomorrow, in Dean's Grange Library tomorrow at 10 a.m. There'll be Connected Dots staff there to make sure that the recording's working and that you can hear it okay and see it okay. For anyone that hasn't been able to join online, and there'll be the exact same quiz or survey that's printed there. So that's just to clarify that. And just a question that came in on so if the Greenway doesn't go ahead for any reason, does that mean that the opportunity for traffic calming and speed limits on Glenlawn Drive will be lost?
That it becomes a very different thing then, and that goes to I suppose traffic. The department, it will be a completely different project. So if this doesn't go ahead, no, we won't have any dealings in terms of just standard traffic handling that's going on with that.
Okay. The next question just is on the process there. I know we've mentioned the Part 8 statutory process, which maybe not everyone, again, another technical term, not everyone is very familiar with. So can we just clarify what is that Part 8 process and who makes the final decisions? So, what does that look like, I suppose?
Yeah, so in terms of, as you mentioned, it's a statutory process, and it has, I suppose, a 6-week period where it goes on to public consultation, and that gives the opportunity for people to get their say, and uh, submit their opinions with regards to the scheme itself. Um, it's then taken, and a report is pulled together, Part 8 report is pulled together and signed off by the chief executive. Um, and that's then sent on to the elected members, that's the councillors. The councillors then will review the reports, and they will effectively vote on their decision of whether they either want to accept it, they want to reject it, or they'll accept it with amendments. And what that might mean is they might select something that is a little bit controversial or something that they want to change, or add in, and they'll put that forward and they'll vote on that as well. So effectively, everybody's input is read and understood by the elected members who will be making the decision on it. And then effectively from that, it's either granted or it's for approval or it's not.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for clarifying that. Just a question then on, I know we've mentioned kind of parking and things. Like just a couple comments have come in around traffic issues in the morning with school runs and things like that in along the proposed route. And I just thought it might be an opportunity to clarify how we think this designed, or how you feel that the current plan will try to alleviate some of that, vehicular traffic. If you want to comment on how providing maybe this extra cycle space will allow for parents and children to make their way to school easier.
Yeah, well, I think that's the ultimate aim, really, and objective of the scheme is to provide that infrastructure that so people can be confident in allowing their kids to walk and cycle to school. At present, there are some trails through the park, but it's a discontinuous kind of disconnected network really in it that's there at present, and we're trying to plug those gaps and provide for that network. And this is, this is not going to solve all those issues, but as part of the wider network, that's the ultimate objective. Ultimate objective is to provide for safe infrastructure, so people can actually walk and cycle where they might once have taken the car. So I really think that's the overarching kind of theme here, really, and that's the approach we're hoping to take.
Great. And just maybe in kind of in line with that, or kind of maybe in a similar vein, I suppose there's a lot of questions that have come in maybe around the demand for the Greenway, how it will increase walking and wheeling and cycling. And I know the NTA have published, various studies and surveys on the increased use of these greenways, or how it helps with alleviating traffic or encouraging more of the use of walking. I don't know, do you want to make a comment on that, or maybe that's something that can be published on the webpage, just some of the
Well, I suppose, in terms of this particular project, I know there's a few queries that have come through in the last number of consultation events that we've had, and it's about the demand, and is there a demand for them? I suppose south of Brennestown Road, there's 3 developments that are residential developments that are taking place, and I think they amount to about 650 odd units. And in the planning that have been granted for all those developments, I think there's an excess of 1,000 cycle parking bays that have been identified for those 3 developments. So straight away we have a huge demand in terms of if they're taken up and they're going to be used, and they will be, because just that's the reality. These developments are sitting right on the route of the corridor. But not only that, it links into Cherrywood, and it links into the Greenway network in Cherrywood and onto, and the final goal is obviously to get onto Loughlinstown Linear Park. So you're connecting way into the, I suppose, into the network. But from Cherrywood alone, I think that the predicted population is 26,000, with a workforce of 22, or jobs of 22,000. So there's a huge population that are right on the doorstep of this corridor. So the demand is most certainly there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. There's been a couple of different questions that have come at either the possible crossing points or connections to the N11 from either Clonkeen, Kilboggart, or just in general, a lot of questions, or a lot of kind of different people coming at the point of view of what way they can connect to that N11 or cross it. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure some of that will be clarified in the slides, but I don't know. Maybe Robert or Mark, do you want to just maybe comment on that briefly?
Yeah, I think it's something that has come up through the consultation process, is that people want that additional connectivity to the N11, and it's kind of a sound suggestion really to if we're really looking and considering a network approach here, that I think we're trying to implement that sort of additional connectivity. As I mentioned in the presentation, we are looking at trying to create a new entrance to the park, which will hopefully facilitate and include for a safe crossing of Oldbay Road to Clonkeen Road, and which itself has a connection down to the N11. So that's one of the connectivity points that we're looking at, like the connection through Glennon Drive onto Corns Court Hill Road as well itself is an enhanced connection. But yeah, I think that's the network approach we're taking here, as Mark said, and at the extent of the scheme, the southern extent of the scheme, obviously we're tying in with the wider Cherrywood network. So that's really how we're tackling that. Really, it's quite simple in terms of an intervention. I think the infrastructure is mainly there in terms of Clonkeen Road. It's a quite lightly trafficked road. It has an opening towards the N11, and the N11 itself will be upgraded as part of Bus Connect. So if we can achieve that connection point, I think that would be certainly a strong addition to the scheme.
Thanks. Thanks a million. Okay, I'm conscious we're coming up to the time, so we'll just do a couple more final questions, and I'm conscious that we definitely didn't get to every single question, but we will make sure we'll do our best to update that FAQ document that's getting longer by the minute, but hopefully that clarifies everything for people in the coming days when it's updated on the website. Just questions there on the shared spaces. So I know I mentioned in my slides in terms of what came up from the consultation about segregated lanes and things like that, and I suppose I don't know if you'd like to just comment on the options there for whether it's with a segregated barrier of some sort, or with paint, or I know there's various options that the engineers would know more of than me, but do you want to just make a comment on whether decisions have been made on that, or is that still something to be determined?
I don't think I can say probably confidently that there won't be barriers. That's not what we're not trying to pit one road user against the other, but essentially the treatment we have in mind for the park section is quite similar to Blackrock Park, where there's kind of different materials used to kind of signify the cycle route and the pedestrian space, with some limited road markings as well, because the cycle track will be bi-directional, so people need to know which side of the track they need to stick to when they're cycling. So it'll be kind of subtle and sympathetic to the park itself. We're not going to over engineer the scheme. Really, it has to fit within the existing character of the park as well. So I think that's the approach really. Less is more, I suppose. But just to give users the confidence and I suppose the inspiration to behave correctly as they travel through.
Yeah, just to add to that one as well, it's we found what has been put into Blackrock Park. I know I keep on bringing it back, but I suppose the reason I keep on mentioning Blackrock Park is the fact that it is a cycle and pedestrian route going through one of our parks, which is very similar to what we're experiencing here. But it's really successful because they've got a subtle colour change between the cycle path and where the pedestrians go. It works very, very effectively. And as Robert said, as alluded to, it's just about making sure it falls in with the tone of the park, make sure it's still very park-like, but it's clear for the users what's happening there. And one of the other things that we have to make sure that it avoids any conflict with, I know we've got the 5K park runs that take place in Cabinteely Park at the moment, which I went out to have a chat with the guys there, and they managed to drag me into it and do it, which I still haven't recovered from. But it was great. It was great to do, and it was great to see what was happening. And what's really happening at the moment is the fact that they just don't have enough width to the footpaths, and they're running along an existing 2-meter footpath, which means a vast majority, or quite a lot of people, were at times running out onto the grass. So by increasing the width of this by 4 to 5 meters, it definitely accommodates that. And at the time of day that's going to happen, it happens in the early morning, a Saturday morning. So you don't expect to have a huge amount of cyclists and users other than the guys that are using the 5K one. So I think everybody will benefit from this.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're coming up to time. I just want to double check that everybody has had a chance to submit the survey. If anyone hasn't, I can probably share that after this, and we'll share it with the slides, and we'll make sure everything's updated on the website, and we'll send an email to everybody to let them know when everything is updated and you can see everything live. Just a reminder, I suppose, that everything's being collected into a report, and that tomorrow we'll be in Dean's Grange Library at 10 a.m. For the exact same recording of the presentation with a printed survey for the people that couldn't be at this and who couldn't get online. So massive thank you from our perspective for engaging, and for so many of you taking up your Tuesday evening to engage with us and to listen to the project and to give your feedback. So we really appreciate it. I'll hand over to maybe Mark just to say final words, if you will. Mark.
Yeah, and I just reiterate what Naomi said. Just huge thanks to everybody who's taken part. And I know it's very close to a lot of people's hearts out in Cabinteely and Cornell's Court, and they really are taking on board and getting engaged, which is exactly what we want. We want as many people to get involved as possible so we can actually hear what people need. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.